from Denver. I was born and raised in Park Hill. And so we knew the police officer who was going through our community. And absolutely appreciated this gentleman. My mom would have me take cookies out to the guy. I'm talking to him. He's asking me, is everything okay? So absolutely there was relationship. I love the guy. You know, I loved him, and I just raised that because I think that our system is based on like this understanding that we still have those relationships, and we do not.
Just because something is legal, it's not necessary. So our responsibility, what I see, my responsibility, and I see police chiefs that I talk to responsibilities, is to raise the bar. Not only do we want to train officers on the legality of the law, we want to train them on the necessity of the law and have them take actions, and they need to ask themselves, is it necessary to go to this step? I can go to this step and be legal. I can tell you the number of shootings like everybody else that I could have been involved in, but I wasn't because I didn't think it was necessary. And I would have been 100% justified in Mitch Morrissey. Well, maybe not me, he might have indicted me, but if it's anybody else, Mitch Morrissey would not indict that individual.
When you have a bad law enforcement officer, that should be disclosed, not protected. And yet, it continues to be protected even in the court system. So why not have a special prosecutorial agency? Again, I know Mr. Blake would love me to volunteer his agency, but to actually look statewide. We have an officer shooting charge right now in Rhonda. That came from the local jurisdiction. Would that have been charged here? I don't know, probably. But it's a statewide concern, it's not just a metro concern. So perhaps we start that discussion.
If you would take one of the hardest issues my office deals with almost on a daily basis away from us and give it to the Attorney General, I think is what the public defender over there wants to do. I think you would lose a lot doing that. We have one of the best officer-involved shooting protocols in the country in Denver. It's followed in Arapahoe County. It's followed in many of the jurisdictions in this state. It's transparent. It's like Stan said, it is much more, we try to get it done a whole lot quicker than they did in Ferguson. So as an elected official, do me a favor and make the AG handle all of the cases that are potentially criminal by the Denver Police Department, the Denver Sheriff's Department. That would free up a lot of resources for me. But when it comes to the fiscal note, you better have a big one. You better write some big checks.
One of the things I think we have to come to terms with is that the job of a district attorney is to make a decision. And I think one of the problems in Ferguson is that that decision took an awfully long time and to some extent was put off on the grand jury. I think one of the things you see certainly from the 4 elected district attorneys here, we're all willing to come forward and say we've looked at the evidence, this is what it's based on, and this is the decision. When you have DAs, whether it's a special prosecutor or elected DAs, who try to fob that off on a grand jury or another process, that in and of itself can build community resentment. I think that's part of what happened in Ferguson.
The Paul Childs case, we learned from things like that. Paul Childs case was probably the initial kickoff for programs like the crisis intervention teams, in which law enforcement has to be a mental health evaluator in addition to a police officer, in addition to a priest or a rabbi or a medical professional. So we train and we learn as a result of the mistakes we make. When it comes to Ferguson, Representative Fields and I had a conversation in Aurora. I don't think Ferguson would have happened here. Clearly it didn't, and thank God it didn't. We don't deploy the same as other police departments, but every police department in the country looks at the mistakes of other agencies so that they don't replicate them, and they deal with them in the future appropriately.
I just implore you not to go forward with these discussions in a silo about the criminal justice system. If you're not going to include educators and the mental health people and the substance abuse people and the foster care people and all of the people that also serve communities, I think you'll come up short. And we'll be having this discussion, as someone earlier said, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and the 90s, and on for.
We have one of the least diverse bodies of government in the judiciary. And I think that's an area that we need to talk about, just as we're talking about our police force and talking about public defenders and the DAs. we also need to ensure that there's diversity in our judiciary, and as the body that actually controls the appointments, we would love to see more diverse applicants and appointments to those bodies so we have true and equal justice and representative justice. I think that's a point that I wanted to make.
I think the chief asked a couple of important questions about, is it legal, is it necessary? I think the third and just as important question is it unbiased, is it equitable? Because I think that decisions are made in the community by officers and that are affected by the individual's race and gender. If someone is a large African American man, I suspect, I believe that they are viewed differently. They are viewed more as a threat, so that it may be legal, it may be necessary, but is it unbiased? Because if that was a white man or a white woman, would the officer react the same way?
We're hiring right now, right? We just did an applicant pool 6 months ago with 1,000 people that applied. Less than 100 of those folks were people of color. Why is that? Right? Why is there this perfect opportunity for someone in the community to become a law enforcement officer, but they don't apply?
You know, I would love to see more black police officers. I'd love to see more black sheriffs. Honestly, I'd love to see more black college students and more black elected officials. But that becomes a problem, or becomes a challenge when you get a record, when you're constantly being pulled over and you get into the system. I'm not going to find those officers that are going to, or those applicants that are going to be able to apply for you because they've been in the system, because they've been arrested for bogus stops, bogus charges, and they've just gotten caught up. So we've got to understand that when we are dealing with police officers, it's not that we're just thinking about today or this hour or the next 15 minutes. We're thinking about how that's going to impact us on the long term as well.
Don't talk to us like we're stupid. We don't know what we see when people die. Don't give the message that you have to be healthy to go to jail, or it's your fault if your heart gives out when you're being beaten. Talk to us like real people.
I would really, really encourage you, if you have the power as you go along in your legislative deeds, to consider those fiscal impacts, because our communities do need these things and we want them. But we want to be supported to be able to do them in a holistic and a healthy way that gives back to our community in a great way also.
I need y'all to stop and have some compassion on the issue and see the faces, know that we're losing friends out here and parents and uncles and aunties that got locked up, that got overcharged, that have felonies and can't get jobs right now. Until that is understood, we're going to go forward with a policy that doesn't hit where it needs to hit. And I'm talking to the people today that are wearing badges. The only ones I trust right now that understand the narrative are my two brothers right there. And that's because they're black, to be frank. And that's not to say anything against anyone else, but I think y'all need to listen to these voices more, and the minority voices in the department.
One of the things we heard as a recurring theme today is that one of the most successful best practices you see in this work is the willingness to have conversation, especially to have hard conversation. And that is the way that you grow and sustain relationships, is by the ability to know someone outside of the context that is high intensity and sometimes high risk. And so I want to thank you all for modeling that willingness today by being here, both speaking your truth and being able to listen and to push back on places that you found objectionable, and also to help inform us to think better about the road ahead, so that anything that we do or that we begin is informed by the truth of that narrative on all sides of this. And as we saw today, that narrative is complex. And everyone has their own, and there are chances to try to disentangle them as best as we can. So I'll turn it over to Representative Fields, and thanks to her for convening.
Yes, and just in closing, the truth of the matter is that we all have to work together moving forward, and if we want to be successful. But I want you to be mindful about what you heard today. And what seems to be a common theme for me is that race does matter in policing. And so what I heard from so many people around this table is that needs to be something that needs to be understood, it needs to be recognized, that there's a perception that when race is into it, there doesn't seem to be balance as it relates to justice and fairness and equality. I heard that over and over again.